Loading. Okay. We're starting back here in the spring now. It's the 17th of January, 2023. All right. And we're on 1 Corinthians 7:13. And Jerry, can you start?
Well, I thought we might want to read 11 and 12 because it sort of builds on it.
All right.
We might want to remind ourselves.
All right. Okay.
Just your version, your translation of 11 and 12, maybe.
All right, we'll do that. All right, I've got to do the page up on it. There's 11, my translation. But if she should put away, and I footnoted that, and that's footnote 202, or Greek is put away, and it's the same word in Matthew 19:6 and Mark 10:9. If she should put away, let her continually abide unmarried, or let her be reconciled to her husband. Let not the husband send away his wife. A little bit different word there. Okay. And then verse 12. But to the rest, even I, and it's emphatic, ego, lego, say, not the Lord, if the certain brother hath and I'm going to change that from has an unbelieving wife, and this one is content to dwell with him, let him not send her away. Okay. Right? Gary, can you take that for us?
Okay. Kai, Gune, Hatis, Exe, Andra, Apiston, Kai, Autos, Sunu, Doke, Oi, Kane, Met, Attain, May, Beto, Aton, and a wife who has an unbelieving husband, and he is willing to dwell with her, depart not from him.
I like that better. It's translated woman by the King James, I think by the American Standard too. I tend to go with the idea of whenever you have a wife, the word wife, Gune and Andra, that it would be husband and wife or woman and man. But this one mixed it with woman and husband. I can see the woman, but wife sounds pretty good too. Yeah. So she has a husband, or a woman that has a husband, is how they rendered it. Now, whenever we have this that has, and Hatis here, Hatis is from hostis, and it's someone who's of such a nature that she has a husband. So it's a woman or a wife that is such a nature to have a husband. This is not just a regular pronoun, it's someone who's of this character and nature. She has and so she's in a category of women who have unbelieving husbands.
A believer who has unbelieving.
She's a believer and she has an unbelieving husband. So he's setting aside a category of people. He's addressing them. And she has an unbelieving husband. Now, sometimes husbands are not converted. They won't obey the gospel. Sometimes wives won't obey the gospel. But if they find themselves in a marriage, and this could have happened very easily, some woman's converted and her husband doesn't obey the gospel. An older preacher told me one time, if you can study with both of them at the same time, it's best. Because if you convert one, the other one feels left out, and sometimes it's harder to convert them, is what I was told by some older preachers. That may be true. if you can, get to study with both of them together. If you can't, study with one, but that was what was told to me. And
Generally, men are harder headed and less willing.
are men hard-headed?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. There may be more women in heaven than there are men. I wonder about that. Okay. Any questions or comments there, Chris?
No, staying clear of that one.
Okay, stay clear of that one. Okay. All right. He or this one, autos, is content. So he's pleased to live with her. And notice how this word is soon, doikeo. And so he receives this, and the word soon is with, and that generally goes with people, soon does. And epsilon is definitely good, something good. So he finds it good, he is pleased, he approves of the dwelling. And I think right here the word dwell is a very important word. Our brethren, I don't think, have understood what dwelling is all about. They get into the dwelling of the Holy Spirit or dwelling of deity. Usually that's where it comes in. And they don't realize that here in this context, that this was an abiding, and it's a closeness. And of course, I understand that's how they view it on the Holy Spirit, but I think sometimes we kind of miss what's being taught right here. We miss the closeness, the relationship between the husband and wife that should be there. And it's not one overpowering the other, it's the two of them abiding together. And he's to dwell with her, and so she's not to leave him. Let her not leave him. May, right here, may, with the present imperative means to stop doing that. So basically what we're seeing here is this was happening, and I have a theory on it, and I can't prove it, but it's possible that the Judaizers, the Jewish Christians, some of them were pushing this matter. The Jews could easily have gone back to Ezra and appeal to that, saying that a Christian a priest can't be married to a non-believer, which was the case under the law of Moses. And so we see that, I believe it's in Ezra 10. And so that's a possibility that that's what was going on. And they were telling them you had to divorce them, as they did in Ezra chapter 10. The translation, my translation, in a woman who is of such a nature, and that's how I translated Hades, who has an unbelieving husband, and he or that one is content to dwell with her, let her not send him away or stop sending him away. Right. Questions or comments? And the Jews could very easily argue, well, all Christians are priests, and so this woman needs to send away that unbelieving husband like they did in Ezra 10. Could be the background of it. But whatever the reason for it, he's telling them, stop doing it. Don't do that. You not send those unbelieving mates away if they're content to dwell with you. Okay. What if the unbelieving mate gave an ultimatum that you can't serve the Lord? Well, in that case, they probably would have to move out. I don't know that they'd have grounds for divorce. They wouldn't have grounds for divorce, but they certainly could separate because they would need to serve the Lord. That's a tough one right there. A tough situation. But, and of course, I advise Christians not to marry, single Christians not to marry unbelievers. It's my
Trouble
advice.
is, the very young haven't developed enough
No.
understanding to
Yeah.
figure. They don't understand why that's the case.
Well, when my wife died, there's no thought in my mind to marry anybody but a strong member of the church. That's what I got with Linda. Okay. Any questions? There was no thought in my mind but that. All right. 1 Corinthians 7:14. Chris, can you read that and translate it for us?
Okay. Ega setai, gar, ho, aner, ho, apistos, in, te, gunaki, kai, ageistai, gune, apistos, in, to, andre, epi, ara, ta, tekna, humon, akatharata, estin, noon, day, hagia, estin. So I put, for the unbelieving husband is sanctified by the wife, and the unbelieving wife is sanctified by the husband, and the children should be clean, but they are holy, and they are holy.
All right. The word gar is a reason, gives a reason. So whenever he has this word, you need to look back at the prior discussion. And it appears to me he's given a reason or an answer to one possible reason that some were given for divorcing their spouses.
Unclean children?
Well, the husband sanctified the wife, you're unclean. You're not, it's an unholy marriage, probably. And I don't think the marriage itself is unholy. I believe that two unbelievers, when they get married, and they have every right to marry. For example, they've never been married, either one of them before, or they're widows or widowers or whatever. I believe that their marriage is sanctified by God. I think their marriage, God looks at their marriage and he considers there's nothing wrong with them getting married. But he does want them to become Christians, of course. But so here, this kind of reaches back and kind of tells me somebody was at least thinking, perhaps someone was teaching that the marriage was somehow unholy. And that would hark back to the law of Moses and the priest. It would kind of fit in with it. That's why I kind of lean that way for that. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Because of the word gar. This is why he commanded them to stop sending away or divorcing. I think they probably were divorcing their unbelieving husbands. So for the unbelieving husband is sanctified. So what someone apparently was saying, you're living with someone who's unclean. Now, there's no such thing in the New Testament as unclean things. That is like there was in the Old Testament. Now there are things that are unholy, that are sinful. I'm talking about something that's not sinful. Certain eating pork was an unclean animal. Say they couldn't eat it. Well, of course, that has ceased, so we're not to call those things unclean anymore. And so we don't have that under the New Testament system. But he's sanctified, he's been set apart. This is perfect tense, middle passive, probably passive. I would interpret it as passive. And he has been sanctified and is still sanctified in or by means of the wife. Right? Now, the wife is holy and it sets apart the unbelieving husband. God recognizes their marriage and doesn't want them to end the marriage. So it shouldn't cause the marriage to cease.
That sanctification doesn't mean he's right with God. That just means then he's within the subject.
Yeah. The marriage is holy. There's nothing wrong with the marriage. That's what he's saying, I think. And the fact that the Christian wife is holy tends to set apart the unbelieving husband. He recognizes the marriage, doesn't want him to end the marriage. Right? So my claim is that probably it might be the Judaizers, Jewish Christians that were going back to Ezra chapters 9 and 10, possibly.
And Ezra told them you have to
Yeah.
separate.
But
from
the
them.
law of Moses said that they couldn't marry an unbeliever.
Mhm.
In fact, a priest could not marry a divorced woman. I don't believe it. I think he can marry a divorced woman.
Yeah, it had to be a widow,
He could marry a virgin,
but she still had to be a Levite. Too.
or if he married a widow, it had to be a Levite's widow. So it had to be a widow of a Levite. I think that was their limitations. And so they were the ones serving in the priesthood. I think he's kind of telling us what he likes. I think he likes for us to marry fellow Christians. Right? But I'm not saying it's sinful to marry a non-Christian. I'm not saying that.
In a time where there were very few of them, though, and they're being made,
Yeah.
It's too late. I mean, it's not.
Yeah. So I think it's better if we marry a faithful child of God. It just makes marriage is hard enough as it is, and if you got a person that's not faithful, even if they're a member of the church, if they're not strong and faithful, they can be a drag on you. They can be a drag on you. So the unbelieving wife is, so we have the husband and wife. The unbelieving husband is sanctified by the wife, and the unbelieving wife sanctified by the husband. So I think he turns this around and is applying it to both the husbands and the wives here by this wording. And elsewhere, your children unclean, but now they're holy. So your children are not unclean.
I took children being unclean to be they would be illegitimate if in fact the marriage wasn't.
Well, that's a possibility.
Legitimate.
That would make sense.
If the marriage wasn't legitimate, they wouldn't have been legitimate.
Yeah, that would make sense, and I'll think about putting that in my notes here. All right. New Testament Christians are priests, and that's probably they might have picked up on that in Ezra 9 and 10 chapters 9 and 10 of Ezra. Right, forbidding them to be married to non-Christians. And else, or in that situation, in that alternative or that circumstance, where, and this of course is interesting enough, this is singular verb and children is plural. Why is that? Help me out.
Children being
Because you
collected.
said one husband, but you can have more than one child.
Yeah, but ta techna is plural, and estin is singular. That's my.
Oh,
You remember the rule?
yeah, it's a class of.
Neuter plural subjects take a singular verb
Oh, okay.
because
I do remember
they're
that.
treated as a unit,
Yeah,
like you were saying, like you were explaining.
yeah. Collective.
They're like a collective. So they would have been unclean. Now the word unclean here and kathartos is clean, and akarthartos is what's off of privative. It's unclean. And so this goes back to the ceremonial uncleanness. And I think it refers to the ceremonial uncleanness at the bottom of our screen up here in Acts 10, 14, 28, 11, 8, 11, 2, 2 Corinthians 6, 17, Ephesians 5, 5. And in the Septuagint translation, the LXX, it's for actual, it's more than to an actual sinful uncleanness. Now, we can be unclean in a sinful sense because we've sinned, but this appears here to be, as you read in Acts 10, 14, and 28, it was more of a ceremonial thing like what they ate. And so there would be certain things that would make them unclean. And I think that uncleanness was representative of sin in the Old Testament. It just kind of represented it, unlike a type and antitype, more or less. That's the way I view it. And of course, he wants us to be free from sin and to say separate from it, not be contaminated by it.
I think it's pretty much saying that God's not happy with illegitimate children either.
Well, also, he is not happy with illegitimate children. And the child suffers. They do suffer from it. Even though our society is very accepting of it, it's still, they do suffer. And children that grow up in a single parent home have trouble. They have more trouble. All right. Now are they holy? Now, again, this is singular. The word are is singular, but it's translated are in the English because of our English language, okay? The spouses and children are both holy. Paul is not saying that he sanctified an illegal or adulterous marriage, but he can't make holy what he's declared to be unholy elsewhere or sinful. So he's not talking about a marriage that was unscriptural, but he's talking about a marriage of a non-Christian to a Christian, which somebody was apparently saying was wrong. And that sounds like the Jews was appealing to 9th and 10th chapter of Ezra, as I pointed out. Any questions? They were divorcing on the basis of the marriage being unclean, probably taught by the Judaizers, not on the basis of fornication. And so they had to live in celibacy or be reconciled to their mate. So in that case, they had probably, some had already done this, and so he tells them, you're going to have to live celibate life or get reconciled, go back with your husband. Or
As long as there hadn't been another marriage in between them.
Yeah.
Which is another verse.
Yeah, that's another problem. Yeah. All right. This passage is perverted to teach infant baptism, but it's not in the verse. Okay, so we're not going to spend time on it. If it justifies infant baptism, it justifies unbelievers being members too. So if you take it, that's what you have to a logical conclusion. God, I believe, recognizes the marriage of all marriageable people. People have a scriptural right to be married, and therefore their children result in that marriage are holy, they're not unclean, they're not illegitimate. That's my claim. All right. Any question? All right. My translation for the unbelieving husband has been sanctified in the wife, and the unbelieving wife's been sanctified in the husband. Else, under these circumstances, I believe that's what the Greek is saying. Your children are unclean, but now they are holy. Okay. Now, they weren't holy in the sense that they'd been forgiven of sin. Of course, little children don't have sin. So, but this could be, all children have reached the age of accountability. I think the holiness is that they're not unclean. They're in that sense. It's a contrast to being ceremonially unclean.
I expected to find the verbs to be subjunctive in this, and that would have been a different translation, but it wasn't, so then I had to really go back to that.
So is it possible that some of the people were mistreating even the children for this situation?
Possibly. Possibly they were looking at the children because, now you're married to a non-Christian, those kids are unclean, and they might have been treating the children improperly. But a little child who's illegitimate, he's not to be treated badly by us. It's not his fault or her fault.
Right.
We've got to quit thinking that way.
Sure.
If we would quit thinking that way, other kids would, and they probably wouldn't be giving them a hard time in school.
Yeah. All right, back to Jerry, could you? Verse 15.
Oh, it is, isn't it? T, Gar, it's
you
Odice.
15?
Huh?
15, I believe.
15.
A day, hope, peace.
Oh, I turned the page. I'm sorry. Ade, ho, apistos, koridsetai, koridsesto, u, dedu, lolotai, ho, adelphos, hey, adel, hey, I'm having trouble seeing it. in toys, toy utois, in day, a rene, kekle, can, oh, Hamas, ho, theos. Man, I can't see those little
Jerry,
ticks to see if they're,
I know you have reading problems, but I give thanks every once in a while that I have good enough for better reading than yours. I do. I actually do. I'm so thankful.
I usually read
that
with
the
a
Lord
magnifying glass.
that that I still have my vision pretty good.
Mhm.
COVID hit me hard with it, but I lost my vision not as good as it was. But we need to thank God for what we have,
Mhm.
and wish our brethren that don't have it as good as we did have it better. Okay, so
I didn't have good vision when I was born, and it has not improved with age. I translated it, but if the unbelieving one depart, let him, and I put in quotation or her, I added or her, depart. The brother or the sister is not under bondage in such added cases, but God has called us to peace. And then I asked the question, which bondage? Are we talking about the staying with type bondage or the marriage bondage or some other bondage?
I'll say that's.
I didn't answer that, I just asked that.
That's a problem because this is a verse that's used to say there's another grounds for divorce. Okay, not under bondage is
I took it as staying with bondage, not the marriage bondage.
I don't believe it's another cause for divorce, justification. Jesus gave only one. Okay, so I don't believe this. Paul gave a second cause. So we need to look for a different explanation, I believe. Yet or but if, say, the unbelieving departeth. Now let's look at the word departeth. What voice is it? Well, it's present tense, but it's got the middle passive form. So we need to figure out what voice is it. Is he driven away, passive, or does he take himself away, depart, based upon his own?
Well, I think it's got to be middle.
It's
He
middle
makes a
voice.
choice.
That's my interpretation. It's middle voice. Okay. Now Thayer, and you got to watch your commentaries, or you got to watch your lexicons. Lexicographers, Thayer as an illustration. I like Thayer's lexicon. Other lexicons do the same thing that he does. They will define their words. Now, if we look up here on the screen, you can see the parts, to separate, divide, part, put asunder. That's in italics. And that's his definition. Okay. Now, he equates it to divorce as a commentator. So because divorce is in normal print. He may be right, but I'm just telling you, you got to be careful how you use your lexicons. Okay. And Thayer, on that which is perfect in 1 Corinthians 13, he has the wrong interpretation of it. Okay. So there's several places he just runs off on a as a commentary, as a commentator. Okay, that reminds me of this older preacher that was telling us. He says this old uneducated guy was really zealous. He said, "I just don't like people to use those commentaries." He's talking about commentaries, so I pronounced it that way.
Uh-huh.
But when I was in preacher school, he was 75 and I was about 28, and he was born in the 1890s. And one of my favorite preachers is gentle and kind, but boy, he knew the book.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, he told us about that. I don't like those people that use those commentaries. We need to use our Bible. So
Yeah.
he was mispronouncing commentary, of course.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's a middle voice, and he takes it upon himself to leave. He's not driven out by the actions of the believer. We shouldn't drive our mate out. Even if our mate is not a Christian, a woman might even influence her husband. In 1 Peter 3, 1 through 6, we got some information there. So she just needs to do the best job she can. And I think a husband ought to do the best job he can too with an unbelieving wife. And the same principle, I believe, would apply is with the woman. And when he does, he's got a better shot of influencing her for good. Okay.
The First Peter 3 reference said that the wife can win over her husband even without words,
Yeah.
by the behavior.
I think that's probably she's not nagging him, and so she's doing it through her actions, through her life. And she might have talked with him about it, but she's doing it by her actions.
But he might not be willing
Her
to
lifestyle.
talk about it, and
He
so
might
there's
not.
still another option.
Yeah, she just lives like she just be the best wife she can be. And he'll say, man, there's something to that Christian. Maybe I need to look into it. That can happen. It can happen. It can happen with a husband too. And just suck it up, and as I say, suck it up and work at it hard, real. Try to do your best.
Yeah.
That's what you do. Let him depart, and this, of course, is imperative, present tense imperative. And again, I think it's middle voice again. Some people just don't wish to live with a Christian because of the restrictions placed on one by the scriptures. I'm not going to be drinking. I'm not going to be taking drugs. I'm not going to be going fishing on Sunday morning to the lake. I'm going to be in worship. And I'm not going to be living riotous living, going to drinking parties and other stuff. All right. So if I married some women, they might not like that lifestyle. All right. And that's why. And of course, if these are people that were converted, that would see it very easily. They've had this bad lifestyle, and their husband has it, and he still has it, or the wife has it. In this case, the husband. And so, if he threatens to divorce or leave you, he threatens to leave or divorce, you can't stop him. There's no way to stop him. Unless you quit serving God, I will either leave you or divorce you. Well, that's an ultimatum. And if he does something like that, he has to let him go. Just say, no, I can't give up the Lord. Right? I don't think the passage is fully understood without understanding the thrust of the middle voice. I think these are both middle voice. And and here, it's a first-class conditional sentence which he expects the antecedent to be fulfilled. It will be if it's the will of the unbelieving mate. So if it's his will, then let it be fulfilled. Don't stop him. Don't try to force him to stay. And you certainly shouldn't be doing it by compromising what's right. Right?
In that society, she wouldn't have much option to force him to stay.
Yeah.
He might have option to force her to stay.
Yeah.
Still wouldn't be God's will, but it
Yeah.
would be.
So we need to look at the middle voice here, and I've got it on the screen here. We've studied this, and so we're not going to spend a lot of time on it. Anybody that's viewing it, you can stop your video and just read this. This is about the middle voice. And I've got several sources, Vine and A.T. Robertson and Ray Summers, Nunn, Intermediate Ground, Perschbacher, and of course Perschbacher twice, and A.T. Robertson again in page 816. All right, so that gets us to them. So if he departs, and he says, now then, if the unbelieving. Now, I know unbelieving is masculine, but masculine could be put as generic for both of them. In this case, I believe it is. That's normally masculine, and it means masculine. But right here, because of the last part of the verse, he says the brother or sister not under bondage. So we get to that question that Jerry raised, which is definitely a question that's been raised. The brother or sister. So now he makes this apply to both man who has an unbelieving wife and a woman who has an unbelieving husband, I think he makes a generic application, is not, and it's not may. So this is an absolute negation, right? And it's perfect tense, right? So now right here, let's look right in the middle of the screen. The perfect tense complete action, its basal significance is the progress of an act or state to the point of culmination, distance of the finished results. In the indicative, the perfect signifies action is complete from the point of view of the present time. So the perfect, according to months or mounts, describes an action as is fully completed and has consequences at the time of speaking. So he's not under bondage in such cases. Now, this is de dulota, and so dulo. Now, we have two forms of this word, and I want you to see them, I think right here, and I'm going to highlight one of them. We have an uo ending, and then we have that's duluo, and we have an oo ending, duloo. Right? Right, so this is duloo. And duluo, when the contrast, the uo ending usually denotes an action or state similarly expressed by the noun stem. Duluo, I serve as a slave. Whereas the o ending indicates causation. I have been enslaved. So you're not enslaved, right? So this is different than uo, but it's oo. You're not making, marriage is not slavery. And I know some think it is, but it's not. It's not slavery. So you're not, as a slave, forced to follow after that husband, whatever he says, or that wife. Because there is a point, and Acts 5:29, I think, would come into play. We must obey who?
God.
Rather than men.
Yeah,
So there is a principle there that I think would fall into place here. And so you're not under bondage in such cases. I think it's talking about, he's telling you, you've got to give up Christ, I think is what he's saying. And you're not under bondage to him. You're not his slave or not her slave, his or her slave. Marriage is not slavery. And it doesn't mean that they can force you to do that, right? In that case, you just have to separate from them, okay? Any question? All right,
But as previously shown, the options are to remain
single
single or be
or re-reconciled.
reconciled.
I think.
I mean, you have to
this is-
ignore the other verse
Yeah.
to take that different.
Yeah, you have to ignore, Jesus gave one grounds for divorce, scriptural divorce, and that would be fornication. And I think it's only the innocent party, I'm satisfied, only the innocent party has the right to divorce. But we get into a lot of discussion on that, but that's my conclusion. I don't see any way you can justify the guilty party having the right. The usage of the perfect tense here is very important. And again, I have statements by Summers here on the perfect tense. And anyone reading this on the internet can pause it and look at it. See it, there's Ray Summers and there's Burton on the perfect months. Burton, I'm going to read him. In its most frequent use, the perfect indicative represents an action that's standing at the time of speaking complete. The reference of the tense is double. It implies a past action and affirms an existing result. I like Burton. He gets to the point, doesn't beat around the bush too much. Okay, his book's pretty good. Just kind of makes it real easy to read. One of my first Greek books that I bought. I think right here, the use of the perfect tense reveals that one is not now, never has been in God's eyes under bondage. So whatever this bondage is, they were not in the past and still not under it. It's not the bondage of marriage then, because the perfect tense tells you they never were under this bondage. That's why I can't take it to be releasing you from marriage, because of the perfect tense. That's my reason. And I'm convinced that that's the case. And again, I go back to Acts 5:29, as I pointed out. Marriage is not a form of slavery, bondage, where they're forced to cease serving God if their spouse demands it. You're not his slave or not her slave. However, marriage is a bond, if we go to verses 27 and 39, and also Romans 7:2, but a different word, deo. And so it is a different bond. And so we need to look at that, deo. And some have claimed that these words are from the same root word, but I can't find a shred of evidence that they are. Now, logically speaking, the fact that I hadn't found evidence doesn't mean there's no evidence, but I've looked and I can't find it. And I've had people to claim that they were, and I said, well, show me the evidence, and they have not given me evidence. I think that they're probably not related. I don't find a shred of evidence that they are. Now, I know they both start with delta, and they both end up in omega, which would be an omega verb, but that doesn't mean anything, so, okay. I think the deo, the delta epsilon omega, is probably more like a bonding like you would have with, like your hands are tied, and I know Brother Warren and Brother Roy Deaver, made some pretty good writings on this material. Don't agree with everything that they had. I think they were 1 or 2 points wrong, but by and large, their writings are pretty good on this. And they likened it to handcuffs, So, and of course, they can be taken off by virtue of one party committing fornication. Okay. But they're not derived from the same root. I don't believe they are. If people are not now and never have been under bondage, and marriage is a bond, deo, at the bottom of the screen, middle of the screen, then these can't be equal. Again, we go back to the thrust of the perfect tense here, what it means. And that's why I quoted all those sources on the perfect tense in my text here. Any question?
So we took this in, then the believing spouse is not under bondage by virtue of the marriage to stop serving God, even if the unbelieving spouse demands it.
Yeah, that's what I think it is. And again, you got 2 different words. Marriage is a bond, deo, but it's not a doulo bond, not slavery. Right? It is a bond, but it's, I think it's a bond between 2 people who are, when they get married, they're equal. I think they're equal. Now, I know there's to be subjection, but there's still an equality. I think there can be subjection and be equality. I think the members of the church are equal to the elders in the sense that they're equal in God's mind or God's eyes, but they're still to submit to the elders. Okay. Any question? You have a comment there, Chris?
No, I think you're right on that. I've not heard it this way, so I think it's very good to hear the bondage isn't necessarily the marriage bondage, but so I understand what you're saying. You're not in bondage to quit serving Christ because of this marriage bond here. If one wants to leave,
Yeah.
Put you at an ultimatum.
Yeah.
You can still serve Christ.
Yeah.
You're not obliged to let that rank higher.
Here's my argument. Here's a syllogism. If the Greek expression "udilota" is in the Greek perfect tense, and it is, then the Greek expression "udilota" means that they're not under bondage in the past, not now under bondage, or never were under bondage. So, but marriage is a bond, different word. So they're not under that bondage. Now, so it means that they're not under bondage in the past and not now under bondage. And the next argument is it can't be the same as that thou, which is a bond, and that marriage is a bond in that sense. So again, it harkens back to ud that do low tie. And of course, remember, u is an absolute negation, contrasting with may. And so it's not now and never have been under this bondage. So that's why I conclude this is not talking about marriage. It's talking about slavery. Marriage is not slavery. Your marriage is not a form of slavery. And I think that's what it's saying. I believe this is a departure from the law of Moses, Ezra 9 and 10, and other passages that were basis for what happened in Ezra 9 and 10. And of course, those who teach marriage divorce principles of the law of Moses are eternal principles, must assume that these people have been married when they were converted, that Ezra does not apply. This would be begging the question, of course. I think if you go back to verse 11, you can see reconciliation now. We see the reconciliation that we've already talked about tonight, but that's a fair exchange. You got to go back to what it means. You got to have a fair exchange. If I reconciled, I've stolen your car or something, whatever it might be. We get reconciled. I gotta pay you for what I got from you. And so if it's a fair exchange, when you reconcile, the believer is not required, not under bondage, to compromise his or her principles to keep the marriage intact. It's got to be a fair exchange. I've got to have my right to serve the Lord. If you give me my right to serve the Lord, I'll be the best husband or wife I can be. And you'll be happy because I won't mistreat you. I'll treat you good and I'll be good to you. So I think that's a point we need to look at too, the fair exchange. Okay. And that would go back to 1 Peter 3, 1 through 6, which applies the wife to the husband. But I think the principle would apply to the husband to a wife as well in principle. And although that is addressed to wives, but in principle, if you treat the spouse better, treat them right, they're more likely to become Christians. But God hath called, and there's perfect tense again, in peace. And again, he wants peace in the marriage. And Paul said in Romans 12:18, if it be possible, as much as in your life, be at peace with all men. There's the principle. So you don't be the cause of the lack of peace. And so again, if you go to the wife and instruction in 1 Peter 3, 1 through 6, you got some really important information there, the background to help. Hebrews 12:14, I don't know who wrote Hebrews, I think Paul did, but there's some reason to probably maybe someone else did. Paul after peace with all men and the sanctification without which no man shall see the Lord. So be a person that's seeking peace, not compromise and not peace at all price. Right? Jesus came to bring a friction or a lack of peace, and in Matthew 10. But that's between those who would not serve God and those who would. So he wants us to be at peace with people as much as we can. We not be the cause of the lack of peace. For God, that's their business, but I'm not going to try to rub it down there, push it down their throat. I'm going to try to convert them, make them converted. We have it also in Luke 12:51. One must choose God over one's family, of course. And so these are principles that I think would come to bear here. The passage that we also had in Matthew 10:34 through 39, and down here in Luke 12:51 through 53. Jesus had not addressed the marriage of a non-Christian to a Christian in verse 12. And so, and he deals with it here, what they're to do. Break up the marriage, but don't let them drive you away from the Lord. So if that brings a sword, then it has to be. Okay? Does that make sense, what I'm saying? I translated it, but if the unbelieving departs, let him depart. The brother or sister, or the sister is not now and never has been under bondage. And I've translated it that way because of the and the perfect tense verb, okay, in cases of this nature.
You could put slavery too, couldn't you?
Yeah.
So you'd separate as bondage.
But, and that, I might need to footnote that and just put slavery.
Yeah, because that way, how you going to know that it's the different bondage
Yeah.
than the other verse has?
Yeah, I think I probably will. I went ahead and paraphrased it. The unbelieving spouse threatens to either leave the believer or to divorce the believer unless the believer gives up being a Christian. Then the believer must not reject Christ because marriage is not a form of slavery where you must submit to the point of rejecting Christ. But the believing spouse must not cause the unbeliever or to desire to leave by his or her actions. For instance, nagging the unbeliever to obey the gospel or nagging them about their sinful actions. Sin needs to be given up because we know it's wrong, not because someone made us give it up. And again, I know some sin we got to give it up because of stealing and stuff like that. Someone can make us do it. Okay, civil government can, but we need to give up sin because we love the Lord and because our hearts repented. That's why we need to give up sinning. All right. Any questions? Jerry, I'll take into account your thoughts there. I probably will footnote it, okay? Just footnote it. Leave it like it is. All right.
Otherwise, you just have to remember that that's a different word and bring that out when you study.
We've gone for nearly an hour now, fellas.
Oh, it's past time.
So, okay, so we're going to stop here. We spent a lot of time on verse 15, but there's a lot of problems on that verse in the brotherhood, okay? Where I have trouble with Brother Warren and Brother Deaver, and they're both dead and they can't defend themselves. They have the view that after you divorce, you can't get back with that party at all. You can't be reconciled. I think they missed the point in this context.
Oh,
And once you divorce that person's a put away person, you can't marry them again. You can't go back to them. I think that's where I disagree with them. All right,
Yeah.
what they teach.
So
I
they
think
count
this passage.
They count separation as that verse. Divorce is the next level. It's
Yeah.
a different thing.
And so they argue that you can't marry that person because they're a put away person or they're divorced.
even though you're the one who did the divorce.
Yeah. I
Interesting.
think you can remarry your mate even if they had committed fornication. I think you can remarry them if they hadn't remarried in the process in the meantime and other problems hadn't occurred. Okay.
Yeah.
So, any questions there? But, okay. All right. Let me get out of this.